Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of From Page to Stage. I'm your host, Wendy Corner, and this podcast is for you if you are an entrepreneur. Yes, page, stage, come together for the entrepreneur. Now, what am I talking about? If you have a solo book out, if you have a contributory book out, if you have a blog, I'll get my teeth in, if you have a blog, that's all published work. If you've only got socials, what's that if it's not published work? You're an entrepreneur, you're an author. Go you. But what about the stage thing? A lot of the people I work with go, oh, public speaking, can't do that. My response is, can you have a one-on-one conversation with someone? Yeah. Why don't you get in a podcast then? That's a one-on-one conversation. Is that a stage? Yes, it is. Audience, this is for you. Come on, let's have you. You're in the right place. So, page, stage, entrepreneur, that's where you are. Richard, I am so excited that I've got you as a guest. Audience, this gentleman is phenomenal. I first met Richard, a couple of years ago now, just as his book was coming out. I have to tell you, it is one of the most powerful reads, and I highly recommend it. But for now, I'm going to let him introduce himself because he knows himself far better than I do. Would you share a bit about who you are and how you've come to be where you are, please?
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. I appreciate that. So, my name is Richard Villasana. I'm the founder of the international nonprofit Forever Homes for foster kids. And what we do is in the United States, as in a few countries around the world, we have a foster care system. And so when a child is removed from their parents for abuse or neglect, they go into the system. And the agencies, of course, will try to find someone local and adult relatives that they can place the child with. And if there is no one locally or unfortunately a relative who does not want to take the child in, then they'll look nationally, which the United States foster care system is great at finding people within our own country here. But that becomes less wonderful when they are living outside the US. And that's where my nonprofit comes in. We specialize in locating relatives in countries in Latin America. And I know Wendy will be talking about that more. Um, as far as the rest of my background, I have, because of my expertise, been interviewed by CNN International, Univision in Spanish that went through all throughout Latin America, ABC, the Washington Post, Associated Press. I have done translation work for the United Nations. I am an international speaker, have been a college professor in other countries, and given talks at universities. So a wide range. And I'm very pleased to say the international award-winning author of the best-selling book, Do No Harm, about the child separations at the U.S.-Mexico border that happened between 2017 and 2021, and my personal involvement to reunite more than 100 children with their families.
Wow, that is some bio, sir. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, audience, can't you see how much of an expert this guy is? I mean, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. Let me take you back in time. What prompted you to start writing? I mean, not the mechanics of it, because we were all about the same age when we started writing, but yeah, how did you get into writing? How old were you and what really excited you?
Well, I enjoy sharing information, and honestly, I've always been a reader. I have read hundreds, easily more than 1,000 books. And so reading for me was something I enjoyed. I had nothing better than spending a Saturday sitting on a window seat, sun coming in, maybe a pina colada, since I love pina coladas, and just reading my book with my friends out on the patio, just having a good time. But I could just be by myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I enjoyed that medium of communication. And it's also a way to get yourself out there to get your point of view and your thoughts out to a wider audience. And that appealed to me. I started doing that when I was doing international marketing in Mexico, which is where I cut my teeth on international marketing. My first sale was $250,000 to the Mexican government.
Your first one?
My first one.
Yep.
Yes. Some of my clients have been Cisco Systems, which is one of the largest internet providers in the United States, AT&T, companies from Europe. So I've worked with over 100 and repped for over 100 U.S. manufacturers in the medical industry, and I've been involved in many other industries. So I enjoy taking that information and that wealth of knowledge and experience and putting it into a book to help people to do more, be more, to cut through the fluff and get down to what really is going to help them be successful. And that's very enjoyable.
So copywriting was part of your work?
So copywriting, in the sense that I worked with government agencies, and so I would use some of their information, which is wonderful. People should know in the United States, if you pull information from a government source, it is free information. And there is a wealth of information the government has spent our tax dollars on to create and put out there that is free to use and to put into a book.
Ooh.
Yes.
Right. Okay, US citizens, you've heard it here. Go look for it for yourself. Don't rely on other people's interpretations. Enough said. Okay, so what prompted you to write? Is the book that we're talking about, the one that's behind you, beautifully positioned? Is that your first
No.
published
No,
work?
it is my second personally published work. My first one was a marketing book for Mexico and leaned more heavily on the culture than the actual functionality of business. Business around the world is pretty much 80% of it's the same. It's that 20% that people need. And it was that 20% that I focused on. How do you talk to someone? For instance, in Mexico, they are very much into titles. And this is a way that separates out many people in the US from the wannabes to those who actually know what's going on. If I can walk into an office and I recognize that that person is, the word is licenciado, which means they are either a degreed person or an attorney, and I use that title, then they know that I'm in the know. Where someone else comes in, and I actually received a letter. I show this when I give talks at universities. Someone in the US wrote me, this is a US manufacturer, Mr. Lick, L-I-C period, which is the abbreviation in Spanish for licenciado. They called me Mr. Lick Villasana. That's how bad our knowledge is, and the knowledge of people in the United States for Mexico. Mexico, right next door, one of our two major partners, and that was the limit of this person's knowledge about titles. So right there, that's just such a giveaway that this person knows nothing about the Mexican culture, which is bad because you never want to be in negotiation. You never want to be in business and just open your hand up and say, I don't know what I'm doing. So the book was
Yes.
very focused on that.
A very necessary book. A very necessary book. Yes, I've audience at the moment. I'm sitting here in Mexico, and I have more than one occasion had great big arrows pointing at me going, spot the tourist. But that's a story for another day. When we come offline, I'm going to share that one with you, Richard. Have you?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that was your first book. When? So that came out when?
That came out about 15 years ago.
Okay. And then the one behind you, Do No Harm,
That
was
came
in
out
2023.
2023, correct.
Okay. Right. Tell us about that one then.
That was in a way an easy book to write. So I have to go back a little bit. So for people who are not knowledgeable about what happened, in 2017, the US government under then President Trump wanted to stem the massive amount of people coming across the US border. Now, there's no denying there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming up. And the US government has in the past taken steps and actions to stem that tide. But the Trump administration came upon an idea that no one had pulled the trigger on beforehand, and that was we will separate children from their parents. Now, a lot of people say, well, were these sex trafficked kids, kids who are being brought up by coyotes, is the term we use for someone who brings a person across the border and is paid? No, the government knew these people were parents. They had papers stating that they were parents. Now, we'll bypass the coulda, shoulda, possiblies, take it at face value. So they decided to do an informal policy called zero tolerance, and they separated the children from their parent and put the children somewhere else and put the parents all over the United States and had this separation. And so that happened in 2017. But because it was an informal policy, none of the legal mechanisms could be pulled into play because it wasn't official. But the government made a mistake. In 2018, they made it official. And at that point, one of the largest organizations for civil rights stepped in, actually went to a judge here in San Diego, California, where I am, and the judge agreed and basically told the federal government, if you go to court, you are going to lose. You have broken the Fourth Amendment, which is one of our most powerful laws in this country. You have violated that law for thousands of these families.
Could you share, for those of us who are not American, what the Fourth Amendment is, please?
Well, there are many variations or segments of it, but the one that they focused on was the right to due process. And that was not happening. They were not able. So the law beforehand, all of this, and even during this period, was that if someone stepped foot on US soil, didn't matter if they flew in, dropped in, came off a plane, swam across, did not matter. As once their foot hit US soil, they could legally, this is key, legally ask for asylum. And because of that, they had to be legally entitled to getting their day in court. But a lot of that was not happening. There were deportations en masse. For those who were in front of a judge, it was basically a rubber stamp. They did not have representation. They did not have the ability to get representation. They had papers in English put in front of them. These were people who had no knowledge of English. To sign here, they were threatened with never seeing their children. Their children were threatened that you're never going to see your mom and dad. I mean, horrible, horrible things that we might think of that would be occurring in a wartime situation.
Yes.
Not a peacetime situation.
Yeah.
That many people in the United States had no knowledge or no concept of the aggressive nature that the US government took to treat these people, who in many cases were coming from places of either massive violence or abject poverty. One family I worked with, the highest level of education available in their region was third grade. You're just not going to, third grade, yes.
Which is how old?
That means, well, it's about 7 years old in our system. So a 7-year-old education was the highest level that the people there could hope to obtain. And I've seen, there's actually one of the interviews was with one of the families that we helped. And you can see that it's basically a mud hut. And their dinner consisted of taking onions that they grew in the garden and mixing with water. They had onion soup. That was their dinner. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about subsistence living. They're just making it day to day. And so people coming from that kind of environment, wanting to be in a richer environment, just like people who are listening are thinking, I want more in life. I want to be around people who have more, have a better business, have more advice, have more wealth. It's a natural pull for people to want to be at a higher level. Yeah, people had no level who were trying and working and doing everything possible to come to the United States, no matter what their situation here, that for them, they see that because of relatively a level of safety that is unknown in many countries.
Yes,
Just that.
exactly.
And I do tell this, and there are people in Latin America that if they would basically kill to live in a McDonald's bathroom, they would have fresh water, toiletry, and security.
Yes.
That's how bad it is. That's how bad where they're coming from is. And so, with that backdrop, the government had made this policy, became law. The court stopped it. So at this point, in June 2028, then President Trump signed an executive order.
June 2028 or 2018?
So June 20th, 2018.
Sorry, I misheard.
Yep, no. And that's where I came in. I actually was driving into LA, Los Angeles, California for a marketing event, came in the door, and someone ran up and said, "You need to call ABC now." And they were looking for an expert on immigration. And so they had found out about me. I was talking with ABC and they were asking questions like, okay, now that the government has been ordered to reunite these children in 30 days, what do you think? And I said, it's not going to happen.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Just a logistical standpoint, forget who the government is. And even if it is the US government, what doesn't, it's a certain point where money doesn't matter. We've seen this through disasters. Someone has a lot of money, but it's amazing how long it still takes to get bottled water to people.
Yes.
Well, that's just simple logistics. It takes time to pull all this together and to get it going. And so I said, no, it's not going to happen. Then a week later, another interview, and the judge said, I want all the children 5 years and younger who have been separated from their parents to be reunited. I said, again, it's not going to happen. And just to share, at that time, there was a lot of finger pointing, a lot of denials. We have an agency called Customs and Border Patrol. That's the entity that does monitor and control access to the US at our major borders. And officials were saying, no, we certainly have not taken babies away from mothers. We have not removed their little children from their parent. Completely false, because I got documentation from the Department of Homeland Security that filtered down to me. And on there, the youngest child, the case I worked, the youngest child that I handled was 6 months. You don't get in my list for me to look for your mother unless you were separated from your mother. The two can't go together. 10% of the cases I worked, the children were 5 years or younger.
The long-term effects that's having on those children, that separation. Oh, yeah.
Massive trauma. And that, I guess I'd say, fortunately, again, government program, we have no idea how efficient and effective it is, but that was part of the reparations the United States had to engage in with these families. So there were two steps. One was finding the parents, bringing them back to their child, and then, of course, mental health issues, caring for the child and the parent.
Yes.
So this is the backdrop to the book. What happened is, because I saw this information and I was working these numbers of cases, I got angry because I'm hearing what's in the news. I'm hearing what the government is saying. Now, I always like to be fair. Two administrations were involved in this. There was the Trump and there was the Biden administration. And neither gets a pass, neither gets a pat on the back, because I have was working cases. The last case we closed was 2024. That's 7 years of separation from their child. And there are still other families out there for whom their parent, the child's parent has not been found yet. But those were the cases I worked. We worked over 100 cases finding mothers and fathers who had been deported to various countries in Latin America. At one point, we were working 5 countries at the same time. We ended up working a total of 7 countries on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security, finding moms and dads that, and when we got a case, sometimes it was in partnership with another nonprofit, but some of those cases we received because after 4 years, multiple nonprofits and entities had failed to find anything. I'm talking about entities like the Red Cross. I'm talking about immigration nonprofits who deal with immigrants day in, day out. They're familiar with the language. They're familiar with indigenous people who speak Mam, Acateco, Quiche from Guatemala. They know this. They have contacts in these countries, but those contacts failed to find that mother or father. And so we were the last step. We are the leading nonprofit in the United States that specializes in this work. If we can't find them, pretty much at that point, everyone accepts they're not findable because of the quality of the work we did. And I am pleased to say that we had roughly a 95% success rate with these families. But I'll give you an example. So we had one where the mother, they gave us the name of the mother, may or may not have given us a birth date and said she lives in Guatemala.
Was the name like Smith?
Well, there's only so much you can do with that information. But we found her in 9 months.
Oh, well done.
We had others where we
So
did this.
Sherlock Holmes is your middle name, is it?
I've actually been called the Sherlock Holmes of foster care by several people. Yes. We did that in multiple countries where I would have at least one case where the name of the father, no date of birth, and just Honduras, Argentina, Brazil, or we might get a date of birth, but it was wrong. Or the name was
the date of birth of the parent or the child?
The date of birth. Well, we've had both. We've had where the date of birth of the child was incorrect. The date of the birth of the parent was incorrect. One was off by 5 years.
Well, slightly wrong then.
Slightly. Misspellings of the location in the country where they were from. So we spent a lot of our work collating the information from the government to put it in a form that we could work with, and then to clean up the information as best we could before we even started. So there was a massive amount of research. And in these countries, it's not like in countries like the US or the UK or Australia, where pretty much everything is known, shared governmental information, cities, towns. Nobody would give a thought to finding Sydney or Melbourne or London, of course, but you might not find major cities in Guatemala, or you might not, and you're certainly going to be challenged to find the cities under those municipalities in those areas. It's not out there on the internet, it's on intranets. It's all sitting in a government computer that you have to walk in and get that information. And that's what we did. We had people walking in with a thumb drive and saying, would you please give me the PDF for this area so we can do research? We went as local as possible because we're not a government agency. A government agency can pick the phone up and say, I represent the US government. Can you work with us?
So I'm going to stop you for a second. As a non-profit, are you then greeted with more consideration, more cooperation than if you had been a government agency, or less? How would that work?
It's really hard to answer because as a government agency, they do have entree with other agencies because in other countries because they don't want to upset the government. Now they may say something like, "No problem." Very popular term in Mexico. No problema. Por supuesto. Of course we can do it. Por supuesto. But that doesn't mean anything ever happens.
Yes.
Well, because we would definitely.
Mañana, mañana.
Yeah, mañana, yes. So even with that, there are many agencies in the US who do not make much progress because that particular consulate, they're busy with their own people, and they may get much busier with their own people here under the second term of Trump. So they don't have the extra personnel to be looking for their own people in their own country. That's not their activity.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't have funding for that. And so it has nothing to do with not wanting to help. It's just simple economics,
Yeah.
time, energy, personnel. I would say we've done very well with our relations with government agencies, but we are also a maverick. So we have found people using Facebook, social media. We have one, I will share this. We had someone who saw a gentleman who was at a booth next to a grocery store, and the booth was getting out the vote. And she talked to him and told him what was going on. And he said, "Yes, I will help you." And so that person, I won't say which country, helped slip us about 4 names that we could not find from the voter registry. So above board, no. Got the job done? Yes. And that's what we were there for because we had no nefarious schemes. We had no bad intent. We only wanted to make sure that we contacted these people and that they knew that they had the ability through the US government, on the dime of the US government, for its efforts to make reparations to bring them back to the US and reunite them with their child. And they could say yes or no. Some people said no.
Really? Right.
Well, for some people, what they went through was so horrific. They
Yes.
just emotionally could not handle doing it again.
Yeah. And possibly, I mean, I'm taking devil's advocate here. Possibly the parent would think, well, look, if they're in the States, they'll get a better life anyway.
That is it. And that's something I wrote in the book that these parents accepted that they had done their parental duty. They had gotten their child to a safer place.
Yeah.
What happened after that was on the child, but they had at least got them out of where they were into
Yes.
the safer, potentially richer environment where the child hopefully could thrive, but there was hope,
Yes.
going from a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
And not that any of these parents, because some people intimated in the press and commentary that these parents, wanted to just get rid of their kids. These are people who had no concept of the suffering that mother or father went through to leave their child in another country and knowing that they would never hold them. Now they may see them, technology, Zoom. These are not stupid people and they do
No.
communicate, but to know that you'll very likely never hold your child again. That is the true sacrifice that one does for love, the love of that child. And so the book points that out. This was a massive effort of love by these parents who took the risks, brought their children up to the US, had them ripped from them, and left without being able to say goodbye to their children in person to spend the rest of their life in many cases, or to lose their life. Because some of these parents, and that's one of the things I shared, was that some of these parents would not ever make it back home alive, and some didn't.
But you have got some success stories, Richard, haven't you?
Yes, we do. We have lots of
Yes.
success stories, and the book does end with that because, as your expression shows, that's a downer. Nobody wants to read a book, and that's the end of it. Maybe the French would like that ending, but no, that's not a good ending. And in this case, we do have more than roughly a dozen stories of how we've helped immigrant children, foster kids who are in similar situations of being torn from their parent. Now, it doesn't mean that the parent was a good parent. In many cases, these were terrible parents, but still for the child,
They were
psychologists
the
have
only parent
said
they'd ever known.
it's the only parent they've ever known
Yeah.
and the only family they've ever known. And psychologists have said that this pulling away of the child is akin to kidnapping. And some kids from foster care have said they felt like they were being kidnapped.
Can I share with you something that you may or may not know about? An audience, this might be something that you're not familiar with. In Australia, the government, I can't remember the exact time, but it was in the sort of 20s, 30s time, decided to rescue Aboriginal children and teach them how to be white. So they were taken away from their parents and they became known as the stolen generation. And there were that policy lasted for quite a while. Children were withdrawn from their parents. They were kidnapped, basically. If you've ever seen the film Australia, it shows the start of that policy. And these children were taken into missions and taught to be good white children. With Aboriginal blood, the more they intermarry, the more they interbreed with the white person, the less black they are. So if you see a true dark Aboriginal person, they are almost purebred, if you will. And the idea was that the Aboriginal people would be wiped out. They would be taken out of society because they were not even classed as human. They were under the census as fauna and flora. I've interviewed a couple of ladies who were children of that era, and the discussion that the stories they shared, that they'd gone off to, they'd snuck out through the chain link fence from school to go to get some sweeties, some candies, and they'd been watched. And while they were in this shop, government people came in, separated families. They were put into different cars. They were not allowed to see their parents again. They were not allowed to see their siblings again. So it's not unheard of in other parts of the world. And I've just gone goosey remembering it, because that generation is slowly dying out now, clearly, because they were in their 80s when I was talking to them. But that policy has had such wide-ranging impact on the psyche of the Aboriginal community in Australia. So it's not a one-off, and it really touches my heart, Richard. So thank you for what you're doing. Tell us more about the book. So it came out in 2023.
So it came out in 2023, and it did work with a group here in San Diego, and it was presented at an international award and won. It won the bronze for the Raul Isigiri Award for Best in Current Event in Politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very pleased with that. And again, the book, the ending part highlights 5 key groups of people. The foster parents. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of adults who have said, I will take in a child. I want to give this child, I don't know this child, I don't know the trauma they've gone through, but I want to try to give them a better life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, God bless those people. And the judges sometimes are the ones, because they can force an agency to do better. And we have had people, agencies. So just real quickly, in the United States, there are more than 3,000 counties. Now, a county is a government entity that does have more than one town, but it may have anywhere from 2-3 cities to maybe 13 cities.
Okay.
So that particular entity controls the foster care system at a pretty local level.
Okay.
3,000 plus counties. The problem is there's no universal national guideline that they must adhere to. So all 3,000 of these counties are doing their way, 3,000 different ways. And there's not one major magazine that's called County Magazine for foster kids that you could put an ad into. So marketing it to them, having their process, uniform. These are all very big challenges for the United States. And so one county can be excellent at finding relatives, and the one next to it may be terrible at doing that, but wonderful at adoption.
Mm.
And the people there, because we're not a very traveled country. And what I mean by that is our citizenry, for the most part, don't travel outside the US. Some people pride themselves on not having left their state.
No.
Unfortunately, yes. Um, incredibly, when it comes to culture, an incredibly ignorant person, and we have quite a few of them running around the US, and some of them are in government. So deciding whether they should look for a child's parents outside the US, there's a belief factor that is not there. But a judge can tell these same people, I want you to do better. And there are a few cases I can think of where the caseworker called us desperate, saying, the judge wants me to do better. I don't know what better looks like. Can you take the case over and solve it for us? Which is what we do.
Right.
And so we did that for one case. If I have just a moment to share that with you, there are 4 children who are with foster parents. And again, Australia is one of the countries that has a foster care system. So the term, but for those who don't know, that again is an adult who has gone through a educational process, has been properly vetted, their criminal history, that they are a good person to care for a child. The child has to be given particular space. They cannot have someone bring a child into a 1-bedroom home. There has to be a
Yeah.
room, not necessarily a room only for that one child, but that child has to have a bed to ensure
Yes.
that that child is not sleeping in a closet or the corner. I know a lot of people would say, well, of course. Well, there's no of course. We did those laws because that's exactly what happened to children in the past. They were in corners, they were in closets, and people were collecting money.
Yeah.
So we have these foster parents, and the 2 of the 4 children were young enough that they were able to adopt them immediately. But the other 2 were of an age where the judge felt that there should be a concerted effort to find their father. Their father was from Mexico, but the father was also indigenous. So
Right.
that made an extra layer because they may or may not be interacting with the normal government, and that means birth certificates, names, credit cards, things of this nature. So we got the call from the caseworker. They said, look, I don't think anything's going to happen. I've been told to call you. We go to court in 30 days. It's been a year for these 2 kids who have not been able to be seen as belonging to their foster parent with their other 2 siblings. The judge is going to probably push this case down another 4 months. If nothing happens, do your best. We came back within 30 days. They went to court. They presented our findings. We did not find the father, but we did find 2 people that, based on the information they gave us, looked to be probable relatives. And the judge
Right.
said, yes. He said, wow, this is great. He said, however, what you did not know is that the father has come across several times, has given us 3 different names, 2 different birth dates. We're not even sure if who we told you to look for is a real person,
Oh,
you know, through documents. So we may be chasing after people that have no connection to the kids, but you know what? You did such a fabulous job. We're going to go ahead and terminate parental rights. That means they were no longer going to look for the father. Job done. Let's get those kids adopted. The caseworker was just like, oh my God. That was the last thing they expected, was that the judge would take that viewpoint. But because we gave them a 4-page report. The way it
right.
works in the US, they may get 2 lines in a document that explains what they did. 4 pages explaining every step we took. And he said, no, this is good.
This is
This works
called
for me.
due diligence with knobs on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, we try to make it idiot proof so that anyone can read our reports, no matter which country it's coming from, and can
Yes.
see if we succeeded, they get a phone number and they get an address. If we don't, they know all the things we did so they can see how thorough we were in our work
Yes.
to locate someone.
Yeah. Transparency through and through.
Absolutely.
You get the pun.
Yep.
Carry on.
So that's so we highlighted them. We highlighted other people who have celebrities, regular people, people who just feel in their heart that they want to give. Those are people who donate to the nonprofit. A lot of times people say, well, how can I help the nonprofit? Unfortunately, because our work is so specialized, we don't have so much space for another administrator or another virtual assistant. We're pretty booked. It really is only through donations that we're able to take the money and to use it for people in country, because we have teams in country that we guide who are able to find someone at a voting booth, or to find someone who has access to medical records or other records. And
it's not what you know, it's who you know, isn't it? And then who you know, who knows, who knows, who knows.
That's it. That's it exactly. Absolutely. So it's because
this
we're
is where
not a
your
government.
network comes in so well, Richard, because you are also a consummate networker. And your information gets disseminated to various different people. I mean, you're sitting in this podcast now because you and I met. Now, we have no idea who's watching this podcast and who could extend this work even further. Getting back to you for a minute, audience, can you see why it's important to share your message to wider audiences? Now, we're talking about a specific nonprofit here, but your message can go out to a wider audience. You don't know who's going to be listening to this. And suddenly, oh, I know a person who knows a person who knows a person. And that's where your message gets magnified. Thank you for letting me share that, Richard. So yes, you're after some donations, aren't you, really, to give you a helping hand. And this book is a wonderful way of illustrating the work that you do.
That is correct.
All right.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, whew. Audience, this has been probably not the lightest of conversations that we've had, but a very necessary one. And we're coming into a new era in US politics. We don't know what it's going to be like. So we're just flagging up that don't forget, when children are separated from parents, it's tough. It's really tough. As somebody who was separated temporarily from her parent at the age of 2, I can vouch for the knock-on effect it has on your mental health. And that was a mighty long time ago. So let's see what we can do to make sure that any separation is minimized. Okay, Richard, we've talked about the book. We've talked about your writing journey. We've talked about a bit about your speaking journey. We've talked about, I'm going to ask you, how do you embody your words when you take them from page to stage? I think you've probably shared that with us already because you're so passionate about it. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Not really. You really summed it up, because you have to have passion.
Yes.
If someone just, I cannot imagine someone going on stage and just talking as if we're looking at this cup and I want to sell you this blue cup, which is about this. Everyone should have, now they may have fear, and that's okay. Practice, practice, practice will take care of the fear. And repetition of speaking will take care of that fear. But that passion should always come through, that they love what they're doing, that they believe it is going to benefit someone, that someone out there needs to hear their message. if someone can come to the stage with that passion, knowing that someone needs to hear their message, that they want to share their message, they have those three, they will be successful because people, no matter whether you do the ums and the you knows, won't matter because they will see the person's heart, they will hear the conviction, the passion, and they will be drawn in because we need more people who empower us, who touch our emotions, who pull at our heartstrings, whose words fill our soul. We need more of that,
Yeah.
and people will gravitate to someone who can do that.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Richard, and for sharing your phenomenal story, which continues.
Yes,
The
it
work is
does.
still carrying on, isn't it? So we'll see whether or not the new administration requires a ramping up of your work, or whether you carry on with the existing situation. So yeah. Oh, watch this space, hey? Any final words for us, Richard?
No, it's certainly been a pleasure to be here and to share. And for anyone who gets my book, my information's in the back. I do love explaining more about what has happened and more that it's not, it sounds like an incredible humanitarian disaster, and it was. But there are people who have stepped up to try to mitigate that and to take that terrible situation and to have some good come out of it. And sometimes that's the best that we can do. Things are just beyond outside of our hands, but there are people there who are working dedicated to give a child, so many children, an opportunity at a better, improved life.
There is hope.
Absolutely.
Oh, what a wonderful way to finish. Thank you, Richard, so much for sharing your From Page to Stage.
Thank you so much for having me.
For now, bye from us.